Chapter 5 covers medical math. We can't avoid math in healthcare. It's frequently used and it requires 100% accuracy. I want to note, though, the math used in healthcare is generally basic and not higher level math. So it's not complex math, but it must be done accurately because errors can have dire and even deadly consequences. If you're unsure of a calculation, ask your supervisor. There are many different usages of math in healthcare, and almost every healthcare profession is required to use some math. Here are some of these uses of math: calculating dosages of medication, taking height and weight, measuring intake versus output, performing billing, bookkeeping, accounting tasks, and lab tests. Mixing solutions as well. Now, this is anxiety promoting for many students of healthcare. This common problem is called math anxiety, and there is this feeling that you just can't do it. You're not good at math, which is really absolutely ridiculous because anyone can learn math. It's the anxiety that prevents you from being able to do what you need to do rather than your ability or your potential. So math anxiety can be overcome, and that's very important to understand. We have some excellent math tutors in our learning lab, and if you need a referral, please come see me for sure. So we're going to cover basic calculations in this video, and I think the best way to go about this is to have your calculator handy, and as we go through these problems, after I say calculate, click the stop, the double bars on the video to stop it, and then once you have your answer, start it. So basic calculations are adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. You may use your calculator in healthcare programs, so we are going to use our calculator today. So let's practice. Calculate. 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 And calculate. So hopefully you are accurate in those calculations, but if not, return and revisit those that you got the wrong answers. Okay, decimals are used as a method to express parts of numbers. They're expressed in units of 10, and it's important to be able to understand what decimals mean, and certainly to calculate numbers with decimals. Very important that a 0 is used before a decimal point if the number begins to the right of the decimal point. And when reading decimals verbally, you also need to know the placement values for the decimals in order to read what the number is. So here are the placement values. This is an important chart maybe to study from for your tests. Okay, let's practice. So 0.015 is read as, you read it, 15 thousandths. And here again, click on the stop so that you can complete it. 121.25 is read as 121 and 25 hundredths. 22.0001 is read as 22 and 1/10,000th. Okay, general rules to follow is never use a trailing 0. Write 1 milligram, not 1.0, because the decimal point can be missed and then you can give a wrong dosage. Always use a leading 0. Think of it as bringing attention to that decimal point since it's not missed. Very important. Decimals are added, subtracted, multiplied, and divided in the same way as whole numbers, and the most common mistake is incorrect placement of the decimal point. If you're doing this by hand, you want to make sure you line everything up. But practice using your calculator Calculate. 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 And calculate. Fractions are another way to express numbers that represent parts of a whole. The numerator is on the top, the denominator is on the bottom. The denominator defines how many parts make a whole, and the numerator is the number of those parts. So you can see fractions illustrated in the image below. And in this image here. When adding and subtracting fractions, you have to make sure to change all the denominators to the same number. To do this, you find a number that each denominator can divide into, a common denominator, and then adjust the numerators. So you can't add 1/2 plus 1/3 as they are. You have to have a common denominator, which is 6, and then you know that 1/2 is the same as 3/6, and 1/3 is the same as 2/6. Now you can add 3 plus 2/6 to get 5/6. Multiplying fractions is straightforward. You multiply across the numerators, multiply across the denominators. And dividing fractions requires the dividing fraction to be inverted or turned upside down. The new upside down fraction is called the reciprocal, and then the numerators and denominators are multiplied to get the answer. 1/2 divided by 1/2 becomes 1/2 times 2 over 1, which is 2 over 2, or 1. All of this information can be found in your textbook. Don't be afraid to review it for sure. Sometimes it's just a matter of reading things over out loud, working with a partner, study partner. Reducing fractions to the lowest terms means finding a number that can be divided evenly into both the numerator and the denominator. 2/4 can be reduced to 1/2, simplifying the fraction. Improper fractions have numerators that are larger than the denominators. To reduce them, you'll divide the denominator into the numerator, and the result will be a whole number or a mixed number. So 12/4 is an improper fraction. You can divide 12 by 4 to get 3, a whole number. Let's practice. Whoops, that one is not set up correctly. But 1/6 plus 1/12, you'd have to find the common denominator, which is 12. So you have 2/12 plus 1/12 is 3/12, and then you simplify to 1/4. Okay, here's one. Calculate. These are a little bit harder. Calculate. And calculate. Percentages express either a whole or part of a whole. The whole is 100%. When working with percentages, it may be easier to convert them to a decimal and then perform the math function. On the following slide, think of the diagram of pie divided into 10 equal pieces. The 10 slices of pie is 100%, and then 100 divided by 10 equals 10. Each slide represents 10%. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so there we have 3/10, which is the same as 30% of that pie. So I'm going to let you do this. 20% of 80. There's a lot of different methods for performing this function. Again, if you remember that you convert the percent to a decimal, that helps a lot. And remember that of is the same as times. So 20% times 80 is 16. That would be 0.2 20 hundredths times 80. And actually it would be 0.2. 25% of 150, calculate. And I'll ask you to bring those problems you're confused with to class. 85% of 200, calculate. And ratios. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on ratios. They're a little bit confusing because ratios can be used like fractions, or they can be used to actually compare parts to parts. So in this case, it might be 3 parts water to 1 part bleach. You won't have a question, I don't think, on ratios on the test. So now we have to talk a little bit about conversions, converting decimals, fractions, and percentages, one to the other. Okay, and you can review this in table 5-6. So convert the percentage to the decimal. 72% in decimal form is 0.72. 25% in fraction form is 1/4. Percentage to ratio, 50% is 1:1. It can also be 1:2, and that's why it's a little bit confusing. Ratio to percentage, 1 part to 2 parts, is the same as 33%. True or false, 3/4, 75%, and 0.75 are all equivalent. The answer is true. So bring your questions for sure to class. We'll talk about these further. For now, go to the response.